36, wanting to know what the regulations and the rules are concerning the misuse of military equipment, planes, helicopters for personal use by ministers, the President and the Deputy President, allegations abounding with regards to that. So are we going to get an answer from you or the Deputy or perhaps someone on floor, Minister?
I'll allow the Minister to answer that question on the activities of the 21 Squadron of our Air Force and the service they provide to the VIPs. The point I wanted to, if I may, go back to is what was raised by Mvovo. You know, the Minister is a very nice person, and I'm sorry to ruffle feathers or to spoil people's appetite because you are still going to have breakfast. My point is that an impression should not be created that the soldiers who were involved in the protest at the Union Building are being demonized by the Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense was not observing labor laws. Because it has not been very clear to the public that the protesters who went there...
Deputy Minister, I'm going to interrupt. I am terribly sorry. We're pressed for time. I'm going to ask you to really get to that question and the answer as speedily as possible. I'm just looking at the clock now, a few minutes to go before we wrap up. So as briefly as possible, please.
Let me allow the Minister to respond to the question.
Okay.
No, finish the question.
No, the point I was making is that the protesters who went there were not ill-treated as far as our labor laws are concerned. Our labor law says any association, and I'm talking unions, that must speak on behalf of any workforce. Firstly, it must evince convincingly evidence that it is representative. There are always thresholds that unions are expected to meet before they are recognized by any employer. The same thing applies with the South African National Defence Force. SANDU had not actually observed those regulations. There was no threshold that the SANDU had met that had granted it recognition by the Department of Defense, but not only that, there are no books, as SANDU had several times been pleaded with, submitted by SANDU, so that they can be audited to establish the point that SANDU indeed was representing a substantial number of members of the South African National Defence Force. The last point, which is very critical, any union, when it goes for action, it would have been after appropriate steps exhausted to resolve the disputes. And it's only after disputes, the process have failed that you go to action. None of these things have happened. An impression has been created that we therefore were dealing unfairly with these members. I'm saying it is not an accurate picture. And I think it needs to be corrected.
I think that matter is unresolved, and we'll get to it at a later stage. The thorny, prickly issue of the misuse of military planes by various dignitaries. Minister, your response.
I wish she could explain what that means to misuse resources of state by way of flying the Deputy President.
On holiday destinations and not state
South African National Defence Force, and this has to be clear to all of us, has a responsibility to look after the security of the President and the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa. It is our mandate. And therefore what it means is that it doesn't matter where they fly to. We have the responsibility to fly them because we have this responsibility of accounting. If something were to happen anywhere, in any part of the country, to any one of them, the South African National Defence Force would have to account for that. So this thing about abusing, I think there's a lot of, Ayanda, I'm sorry to say this, there's a lot of misinformation and in the process abuse of people's names about some of these matters. Because even last year, I think about 2 years ago, when the Deputy President went on holiday, there was a whole big story about how we had ferried the Deputy President to some holiday destination. The point is he can't go commercial.
All right. Thank you so much, Minister. I think, again, due to time constraints, we'll have to leave it there.
We can't go commercial. We have a responsibility, even if a person says, I want to go to a family funeral. In fact, I wish you could know that they can't even drive for X number of kilometers. There's a decision that a deputy president and president may not drive X number of kilometers. So there are limitations. In fact, if there are people who have no private lives, those are the two people, because I'm sure at times you want to fly with your family, jump into a SAA or what's this thing, Emirates, and enjoy yourself and enjoy the comfort of Emirates with your family. But you can't, because the South African National Defence Force is going to raise questions. When you jump into a commercial aircraft, President, where are you off to?
And we can't really expect him to check in like the rest of us.
And who is it that you want to converse with? Who is it that you want to interact with without the presence of your security in the comfort of the resources of the states that are being provided to you?
Minister, I'm going to interject there and just come in and ask you, you've had an opportunity to clarify some misconceptions that are out there. I'm going to give you another opportunity to perhaps dispel some myths that abound about your relationship and that of the former Defence Minister, Lindiwe Sisulu. Perhaps you can clarify, there have been some reports and newspaper articles about somewhat of a frosty relationship between the two. Would you put those allegations to bed?
I think it's a very, Ayanda, it's a mischievous question. The reason why I'm saying it's a mischievous question is that I'm sure the majority of people who are in this room would know that Lindy for many years has been my best friend. And we have a long way we've traveled together, probably more than 30 years. And therefore, if there's if people think that there's disagreement on a particular matter, then people tend to believe that suddenly you've become enemies. Let me clarify something. I come from the African National Congress, and Lindy is a member of the African National Congress. Not only are we members, we are both in the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress, and we are in the National Working Committee of the African National Congress, right? So you are deployed by the African National Congress, and whatever policy you put in place or you implement when you go into that deployment, it is a policy of the African National Congress. So what I do in defense is actually pursuing some of the policies that she has put in place. And I think I've done very well in doing that. I've not contradicted any of the policies that Lindy has put in place as my colleague and my comrade. Now, the problem is, I think there's been this story that has been going on and on about aircrafts. And I don't know what the story is about. Quite honestly and brutally frank, sitting here as Minister of Defense, I don't know what the issue is. I don't know what the issue is out there in the public, in the papers, about disagreement. What disagreement? I wish I could know.
We also wished we could know. That's why we wanted to ask you. But it seems you're saying it's a non-story, basically.
That's why I'm saying there's a lot of mischief. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of mischief. And I think it's unfortunate. Because I'm not the kind, people will write stories. I'm an extrovert. Mm-hmm. But you know what? If there's anyone who avoids getting involved in a dirty fight with the media, it is myself. I'm actually media shy.
You sure could have fooled me. But Minister, at least you afforded the opportunity to clarify.
I'm media shy. I run away from the media because I refuse and I resent to be misrepresented. So even in this case, I insist that whoever is spreading the story Good for him, perhaps not good for us. Lindy has been a friend. In fact, strange, not my friend, the three of us have been very close because we work together in different areas, starting from as members of the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence for years. So we've just worked together. Now, in comradeship, you then developed relationships and you develop friendships. And if there's anyone I've been friends with, it is Lindy. There are two. I have two friends in my life. It is Lindy and Baleka. And that friendship is from the trenches. And it's a friendship I will forever treasure. But disagreements will be there. And I can disagree with you.
True. And
disagreeing with you doesn't make you my enemy.
True. Minister, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for clarifying that for us. I'm going to go to John Mohale. John weighed in on this debate via Twitter. John says, please ask the minister about the pending case of the Gupta landing case. It's since been called the Gupta Gate at Waterkloof Air Force Base. Where are we in terms of conclusion on that front? We do know there have been some, I think, a disciplinary hearing. Have there been resignations, firing? We know name dropping definitely was one of the things that took place there. But where are we with regards to the Gupta plane landing debacle?
Well, we had established a board, remember, from the side of the Defence Force. The Chief of the Defence Force established a board that conducted an inquiry at the Air Force Base in Waterkloof. And there were findings which were made against certain individuals, and recommendations were made to the Chief of the South African National Defence Force. And of course, action has been taken. Equally, I'm aware from the side of DECO that the Chief Protocol Officer, who was amongst the person who was central in the arrangements, also went through a disciplinary process, and there were punitive measures, action taken against him. So everything, as far as I'm concerned, in relation to the so-called Gupta Gate, is now history. It is behind me, and I do not even want to think about it. I think that the way we dealt with the matter and the way I conducted myself as Minister of Defense when the matter arose, I think it was with absolute integrity, and it is integrity which I inherited from my upbringing, from my home. And I'm very happy about it.
Minister, something that did take place in the past but has reared its head to surface somewhat, if we can put it that way, is the arms deal. We know that an inquiry is in place. So Anonymous wrote a question here wanting to know by when public will know the actual truth. I think we can't really answer that much. It's up to the arms deal inquiry to look into that. Also wanting to know about your achievements in the last 5 years. I think you went at length to speak about that in the opening as well. So perhaps you can just speak to us about your view about the process in the arms deal inquiry. Are you happy and satisfied with the way things are going at present?
I'm very satisfied. I'm very happy. Reason why I'm very happy is that what is coming out of that commission by way of, let me say, the conduct of the officers who have appeared before the commission, for me, has been very good. As Minister of Defense, I'm very proud. I'm very proud because the people who have appeared before the commission, because you see, this thing about the defense, this arms deal, it's always somehow associated with rot, which supposedly as a black government brought in when we came in 1994. But can I just remind you that, in fact, as we came in, there was a process, in fact, of procuring some of this equipment. And that is why you see, for instance, some of the people who have made representations to have appeared before the commission are actually officers who have been in the South African Defence Force for a long time. But because they are South Africans, they are patriots. They are members of the South African National Defence Force. They've stood up and they've told the story as they know it and as they stand it. So in my, I don't know what will eventually come out of it, but for now, I think the process has been a very transparent process. We all, all of us, it's publicized, it's live all the time. So I don't think there will be a way of concealing the outcome if there is untruths which have been told. I believe that whatever it is that has been said, that has come out of the process, former ministers have appeared, and I know that the former President Thabo Mbeki will also be appearing in May, and it will be appearing in the glare of the public and through the media. So I think, as far as I'm concerned, up until now, on the side of the South African National Defence Force, we have absolutely nothing to hide. We have nothing to hide. I think at that level, all processes went very well from what I know and what I have been briefed about. If anything else happened, it probably happened elsewhere away from the South African National Defence Force processes.
You touched on this issue a little bit earlier about the mandate of the SANDF domestically when they're not out stationed wherever that they are across the continent. Domestically, they help as reinforcements to police. They help with the rescue and recovery efforts in natural disasters. There is that key issue, though, of drugs trafficking, where there were calls for the SANDF members to be sent to Cape Town to try and mitigate some of the drug trafficking that's happening there, the gang violence, etc. This is a question from table number 31, Shadrach Ramkhole. He also speaks about the issues of drugs and drug abuse and trafficking. So Shadrach, if you can, as briefly as possible, we've got about 10 minutes before we wrap up the show. If you can quickly just answer the question. I know I've jumped a few because you have answered them already, but if we can rush a microphone to table number 31, where Shadrach will speak to us about his concerns.
Thank you, Ayanda. The Honorable Minister, I'm Shadrach Ramkhole. I think mine is straight and forward. Can't a minister maybe revive? I mean, I was once a soldier. We used to deploy in Cape Town during the Pahat time and during Ingat and ANC in Chogoza. Can't a minister maybe deploy soldiers into our township to combat the crime? Because, police can't do on their own. Thank you, the Honorable.
No. I think the utilization of the Defence Force, the public is aware, is provided for in the Constitution. And as far as internal deployment is concerned, yes, it does include coming in support of the police when the President so decides. But policing, we've got to be very clear about it. It's a police matter. The South African National Defence Force can only come in support of the police. It is not its forte to be involved in policing. Matter of fact, one of the critical questions which were addressed by the White Paper of 1996 when we were transforming our defence, our military environment, was that internal deployment of the South African Defence Force should actually be not part of the norm. It must only happen in very extreme circumstances, and there must be good reason to justify the reasons why men and women in South African Defence Force are seen moving up and down inside South Africa's borders.
All right, let's go to table number 28. Dr. Thandi Ndlovu wants to know, the question is, what is my role within the SANDF as a member of the reserves? Perhaps if you can just quickly tell us about what you have been doing, what your lament or your concern is. Table number 28, I believe it is. Yes, 28.
Thanks, and I think the Minister went some way in explaining that there's 21,000 reserves that are being utilized. But Minister, I think your policy in terms of the different arms of service is probably different for the different services in the reserves. I'm a qualified medical doctor, and I belong to the reserves. However, I just don't know in terms of my skills how these may be deployed. And I guess what I heard you say drives me to say that look at the overall strategic direction of the reserves at a global level so that the different arms of service then have a blueprint of what these members are supposed to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thandi. And I welcome and I hope that on Saturday you'll be part of the reunion conference of all women military veterans who will be assembling here in Johannesburg. It's important. It's important because our veterans, some of them, women in particular, are going through a very, very rough time. And I agree with you that we need to have an overall approach, a strategic approach that allows us to look at all the different arms of service. Because you're right now we are deployed to the Congo. I know that there are reserves who are in there as engineers, some of them, of course, as infantrymen. But I'm not aware that we have reserves who are deployed as doctors. But not only that, as I said earlier on, currently we have a serious problem of doctors who are slipping away and are resigning because of the challenges of the conditions of services at the hospitals where they are, including the OSD, for instance. And therefore, there are times when, obviously, you will need the services of medical doctors such as yourself. And I do want to say that talking about medical doctors, that very soon, if we allow what is currently going on, we'll run short of doctors. And I don't think it is in the interest of the Defence Force to have a shortage of doctors. In my view, reserve force medical personnel should be able to walk into any hospital and assist when a need arises. So I think that even in maybe the Secretary General of SAMS would like to say something on the matter, but I honestly believe that as it is now, one male has problems. And I think that there's nothing wrong in you taking an hour or two, even if it's in a week, to come to one male and render your services as a reserve force member. SG?
Thank you very much, Minister of Defence. Through you, Madam, I just want to assure our reserve force members of the South African Medical Health Services that at this stage in time, it is time actually to ask them to come on board and join us, because through the history of the South African Military Health Services, we've been having a problem of recruiting doctors into the reserve force. Because most of the professionals, you'll find that they had their own private practices, and then they also were actually working for the state in other departments, like the Department of Health, and of course they never had an opportunity to come actually and train in the South African Military Health Services, because we cannot deploy doctors without the necessary military skills and military training. So they have to undergo their training first before we can deploy them. And I promise them that presently we are now having programs in place to train them militarily before we can deploy them. And we are going to do that. But at the moment, as the Minister said, we really need their help in our military hospitals. Thank you very much, Minister.
But fortunately, SG, in this case, you know, she's trained in both.
Yes, I know, Minister.
That's why she's a military vet.
Yes.
Okay. So you're welcome, Thandi. Thank you.
And just in closing, Minister, we've got about a minute left before we have to wrap the show. I know that there was a recruitment drive in Nasrec not too long ago. I'm not quite sure exactly when it was, where there was an appeal for young South Africans to consider joining the SANDF and to consider serving their country on that platform. How successful was that? Is there a huge interest in people joining the SANDF?
Yes, of course, there is a huge interest in the program to bring in young people as part of the rejuvenation of the Defence Force. It's unfolding well. However, in the last 2 financial years, we have had to cut the numbers almost to half. In the past, we used to have 2 intakes, one in January, the other one in the middle of the year around July. That would end us in a year with about 20,000 young people who come in through that program. But now we only are able, because of budgetary constraints, we are only able to take 10,000 in a year. But there is a lot of enthusiasm, as you are aware, and the program is unfolding well. However, with more money available, we can actually do more than what we are doing now.
Let's leave it there. Thank you so much to the both of you for joining us, the Minister in the Department of Defence and Military Veterans, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, and her Deputy Thabang Makwetla. Thank you so much for your time. And thank